Today we're looking at month number 12 of the Golden Age of comic books. This is one of the most important months in the entire history of comic books, as not only is it tying in with the 12th issue of Action Comics with the 12th appearance of Superman, but it's also the first appearance of Batman. DC now is creating a monopoly with this new superhero genre, having the two most popular new heroes in the comic book world. And other publishers are starting to jump on. This is the second month in a row we've had a new comic book publisher. So let's look at some of the facts, values, and rarity of the books on the stands for the date of May 1939. This is month number 12, tying in with Action Comics number 12 and the 12th appearance of Superman. There were two number one issues debuting. Keen Comics was a new short-lived series from Centaur Publications. Very scarce, only 2 copies graded by CGC in all conditions, including restored copies. Decent price tag of $142 in low grade. The other big book of the week was from brand new publisher Fox Comics, who gave us Wonder Comics number 1. This is one of the most valuable comics of all time. Major key book, early superhero title, and look at the hefty price tag in the Overstreet annual price guide, over $2,000 for a low-grade copy. 15 copies graded by CGC, and even 2 high-grade copies exist. The other publisher that had debuted last month was All American, which would later become part of DC, and their new titles, All American Comics number 2 and Movie Comics number 2, were both out this month. Both very scarce on the CGC census, and both fairly affordable on the lower price tag for a DC book of this age. The DC list is quite big this month. Of course, Action Comics number 12 with Superman and Zatanna in it. 30 copies on the CGC census, so quite a popular book. Hefty price tag has helped bring them out, but no high-grade copies of this book. Looking at Detective Comics number 27, the big book of not only the month, but in fact the most valuable comic published in 1939, and the second most valuable and collectible comic book of all time, featuring the first appearance of Batman by creator Bob Kane. Batman also does appear on the cover of this issue. Last month he had appeared only in name only in a bunch of the DC books, but was not actually shown. So if you look at the value of all the books this month, Detective Comics number 27 by far is almost, it's like 96% of the entire month's value. $130,000 for a low-grade copy of the first appearance of Batman, or $2 million for a high-grade copy. Looking at the CGC census, the book's not that scarce. The high price tag has definitely brought copies out. There's 58 copies now graded, including 3 in high grade. What's interesting, though, is in overall copies, this book is actually scarcer than Action Comics number 1, but does win out for more high-grade copies. DC also gives us Adventure Comics number 38, hefty price tag, $300 in low grade, and also More Fun Comics number 43 at $187, and there's 10 copies on the CG census. So DC seems to monopolize the most valuable books and the most common books that are graded by CGC. The only other major book jumping out is Wonder Comics number 1, with a hefty 15 copies graded, 2 high grade, and that hefty $2,000 price tag. What else do we see happening this month? Well, there were 22 comics on the newsstand with a cover date of May 1939. This was down from 26 last month, so a bit of a drop, as a few titles were bi-monthly and do not appear on this month's list. We're starting to get more and more variety of publishers. Centaur, of course, has been one of the biggest publishers in early comic books. And right now, they've got 5 titles on the list this month. And they're all fairly scarce. The most common one is actually Amazing Mystery Funnies Volume 2, number 5. And it's got the highest price tag at $343. 9 copies graded. Keep in mind, 9 copies is still not a lot. If you take the 22 books on the newsstand this month and just use an estimate of 200,000 copies of each printed, that still gives us 4.4 million comics potentially on the newsstands. And it could be actually that the print runs were even way higher than that at this point. Now that Superman was popular and the superhero genre was climbing, and the publishers were jumping on the bandwagon. I think it's a sign that this market is definitely growing. So you may find that the average print run could be 300,000, maybe even 400,000 on a lot of these books. But we'll just stick with my point to make, is that with 4.4 million comics out this month, only 189 copies of that has survived to be graded by CGC in all conditions, and only 14 of the 4.4 million comics have been graded by CGC in super high grade 9.0 or higher. And yes, this includes restored copies. If we look at what books seem to be the scarcest overall, we'll see that there's actually 2 comics on this list that are so scarce and underappreciated that they have 0 copies graded by CGC in any condition, including restored copies. That is Feature Funnies number 20, which is the final issue of that title from Quality Comics. That was their only title on the newsstands, worth only $40 in low grade, and that is why people are not rushing to get this book graded. And the same with Popular Comics number 39, only worth $47 in low grade. So for these 80-year-old comics, just not enough demand or hype for these books, and people are just not getting them graded. But these books are also extremely scarce, to keep that in mind. They're just not out there. Because you would think that if anyone had high-grade copies, yes, they would grade them, because the high-grade books are always worth something decent in high grade for books of this age. And we find that Crackerjack Funnies number 11 is the cheapest book on the newsstands this month, only $36 for low grade, and you can even buy a high grade near mint copy for under $500. But still, that's a pretty hefty price tag. Modern comics rarely are worth $500. The comics that seem to be the most common in high grade is, by luck, the Detective Comics number 27. The high price tag has brought out 3 copies of that. Mickey Mouse Magazine number 44 has, by luck, 3 copies, and that is due to Western Comics actually usually keeping file copies of their books. So 1 or 2 of those could be file copies. And that's usually what we see. And that can also happen with Dell Comics. However, this month, all the Dell Comics do not have any high-grade copies. So possibly no file copies, or else if there is a file copy, it just hasn't survived in high grade. Ace Comics number 26 out this month from David McCabe Publications features the first appearance of Prince Valiant in comics. This is a major key book, used to be one of the most valuable comics in the early days of comic book collecting, but there's only 5 copies graded, and the price tag is still not too high at only $135. So this book's scarce does seem to be undervalued due to its historical importance and scarcity. And Famous Funnies, number 58, still the longest running comic book in the comic book business, now at 58 issues. Still quite scarce, only 2 copies graded and no high grade copies by the low price tag value of only $39 in low grade. So we recommend you check out these great classic books. Go see if you can find copies in any condition. These books are near impossible to find. They do pop up once a while on auctions. So if you want to collect these gems from the early days of comic books and the golden age, these are the fun ones to go hunt for.